They believed the cameras had already seen all the secrets, all the confessions, all the broken vows. But what was happening behind closed doors was much more sinister than anything that the viewers had witnessed on Sister Wives. It was not only a failing marriage or family fight anymore, it was betrayal of such magnitude that it left even the most devoted fans stunned. He stared at me and told me I was nothing without him. Those words, shaken, bitter, and raw, were the match that lit everything on fire. Christine Brown had stored that memory for years, in the pocket of her silence. But when she finally uttered them, in a place worlds away from the luxury of reality TV, it created shockwaves no one in the Brown family could have ever anticipated. And if you think that was shocking, wait until you hear what came next. Because this wasn't about one wife walking away from Kody Brown. This was about decades of image so carefully built, of polygamy as depicted as unity, of a family as shown as a bond of love and faith, suddenly shredded before everybody's eyes. Christine wasn't walking out, she was ripping open a curtain that had been well kept closed for years. Imagine this: a room thick with silence, the atmosphere thick with tension, as Christine lifted her head, her voice firm but her hands shaking ever so slightly. Facing her was Kody, eyes blazing with fury, his jaw clenched, every facial muscle struggling to maintain control. Between them was more than a shattered marriage. It was a war of truth and deception, promises and betrayals, a tale that was never meant to leave the confines of their house. And here it was, in the public eye. But the biggest shock: Christine didn't make these revelations alone. Bit by bit, others' silence started to break. Janelle, whose strength had always been measured by her calm demeanor, was suddenly dragged into the tempest. Her silent tolerance yielded to a frustration that had been years in the making. And then, of course, there was Mary, the initial wife, with scars so profound they barely qualified as real anymore. Each word said framed Kody in a light he never thought the world would see. But even as intense as those scenes were, the actual surprise hadn't come yet. Because behind every epiphany, every tear, every furious stare-down exchanged, was always one question that nobody could shake. Was Kody Brown finally going to lose not only his wives, but the empire he had constructed around them? And in that silence, everything was altered. Sister Wives had been constructed as a narrative of unorthodox love, of difficulties overcome with faith and tenacity. But what Christine loosed was something different. It was not about love anymore. It was about survival, about taking back dignity, about finally revealing the fissures that had been concealed for too long. And as she finally spoke, one thing became impossible to ignore. The family was no longer whole. It was broken, shattered, crumbling under the pressure of secrets that could no longer remain hidden. So this is the question: if Christine had found the strength to shatter her silence, what else is waiting to be uncovered? And how much more devastation would occur before the truth finally engulfed them all? Christine's walk away wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a flashpoint argument or a hasty emotional decision. No, this was the culmination of years, decades even, of subtle put-downs, broken vows, and gradual destruction of her soul. On TV, viewers caught glimpses of it: the insincere smiles, strained banter, and times when her laughter never quite hit her eyes. But what the cameras picked up was only a shadow of the tempest raging within her. In the background, Christine bore the brunt of having been told that she was not enough. Not enough as a wife, not enough as a mother, not enough as a woman. Those might not have been verbalized all the time, but they were inscribed in the silence. In the manner that Kody's focus went somewhere else. In the manner he spoke with fervor of one wife and brushed her aside. And yet, Christine clung. For the sake of the children, for the sake of the family name, for the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, things would improve. But each year, the fissures grew wider. The once promising man of unity was now a stranger in her house, and the family that had once boasted of faith and closeness had become a platform for resentment, jealousy, and emotional remove. What shattered her wasn't neglect alone. It was seeing her children witness it, sense it, take it in. Picture sitting at a dinner table, where laughter comes across as contrived. Eye contact is an act. Love is something that feels written into a script for the cameras. Christine witnessed the reality. Her children were being raised in a house founded on unspoken hurt, and she knew she couldn't allow that legacy to shape them. And if you were impressed by that realization alone, wait until you learn what occurred when Christine confronted leaving. The response was nothing less than explosive. Kody, a man who had long insisted on loyalty and obedience, viewed Christine's choice as betrayal. His wrath wasn't just about the loss of a wife, it was about losing control. And for a man whose identity rested entirely on the picture of keeping his family together, the possibility of one wife escaping sent everything unraveling. But Christine was finished. And when she finally stood up for herself, something amazing happened. The ripple effect started. Janelle, quietly having suffered her own amount of neglect, began questioning her place as well. Mary, whose hurt went further back than anyone, started reliving wounds she believed she had covered. Suddenly, Christine's choice wasn't about her anymore. It was revolutionary. And amidst all this turmoil, though, one person stood firm, virtually inviolable. Robyn, the wife who had for so long been depicted as Kody's first love, the woman who appeared to have his loyalty and devotion pegged in a way that none other did. For Christine, an escape wasn't merely about reclaiming her life, it was about revealing the truth that everyone had sought to suppress, that this was not a family of equals. It was a hierarchy, and the hierarchy had finally destroyed them. But here's the twist. No one expected. While Christine was stepping into her freedom, she unknowingly opened a door to something far bigger, a reckoning that would shake not just Kody, but the entire Sister Wives empire. The instant Christine's choice became known within the family, the atmosphere changed. What had been a whispered rumor became open arguing. All of a sudden, every wife was compelled to stand in front of the mirror and ask the question they had been dodging all those years. Am I really content here, or am I merely staying alive? Janelle was the first to bear that burden. For years she'd been the stable one, the wife who managed the chaos, who stayed out of drama, who kept her mind on the kids and the day-to-day necessities. But inside, she knew she'd been giving up her own needs, her own identity, in order to maintain the peace. Seeing Christine walk off didn't merely upset her, it awakened something within her that she'd kept long dormant. And if you believe Janelle's wake-up was silent, think again, because the minute Christine started to walk away, Janelle saw the contrast in Kody's reactions. His rage was boisterous and over the top with Christine. But with Janelle, it was icier, edgier, more condescending. He didn't battle for her the same way, because secretly he believed she wouldn't go. And that belief might have been his largest error. While that was happening, Mary sat back in the shadows. The first wife, Kody's former best friend, now sat and watched as the foundation of her life began to crumble all over again. Her suffering was different. It was the suffering of a woman who had long since lost her place, but still held on with some hope that maybe, just maybe, she still belonged. Christine's departure forced her to face a truth she dreaded. If Christine, with all her resilience, could leave, what excuse did Mary have for staying? And then there was Robyn, the favored loyalist, the one who refused to believe the family could fall apart, even as the walls came down. On television she cried, pleaded, begged for harmony, but behind closed doors, her leverage increased. With each wife who failed, her control over Kody intensified. To some she was sympathetic, to others manipulative. But one thing was certain, as the family disintegrated, Robyn's hold on what was left tightened. But here's where the plot twists into darkness. Because Christine's choice wasn't personal. It was public. It wasn't just about abandoning a husband. It was about breaking an image the family had created for more than a decade on national television. All of a sudden, viewers who once looked up to the Browns as representatives of unorthodox love suddenly questioned everything. Was the show a fabrication? Had the family been acting all along? And for Kody, that question wasn't just embarrassing, it was perilous. His whole image, his reputation, even his livelihood, rested on perpetuating the legend. If Christine's account became the prevailing one, if the world started thinking of him as the villain rather than the patriarch, the empire could collapse overnight. But Christine wasn't giving up. With each interview, each calculated comment, she made it plain she was free. And her liberty was the strongest arm of all. But the tale was only just beginning. Because as Christine came into her own, something nobody anticipated started to take place in the background. A domino effect that would sweep every wife, every child, and even the future of sister wives itself into the tempest. When Christine finally broke away, it wasn't just a family secret anymore. It was a headline. What had once been confined to tense living rooms and awkward confessions on reality TV suddenly spilled into the open. Fans who had followed the Browns for over a decade felt blindsided. The story that had been sold as faith, unity, and resilience now looked like manipulation, favoritism, and collapse. And the internet didn't stay silent. Social media blew up with hashtags, think pieces, and plenty of speculation. Thousands of voices were raised, many with Christine applauding her strength for leaving. Others broke down every past episode, re-watching scenes that now seemed like red flags, evidence that the foundation had been shaky all along. The show wasn't entertainment anymore. It was proof. And if you think the outrage from the public would just end with Christine's case, wait until you see how it started pulling everyone else into the limelight. Janelle's reticent perseverance, once respected as fortitude, now stood exposed as submission. Fans pleaded with her to take a cue from Christine, to escape from what they'd come to refer to as a toxic empire. Memes infested timelines, videos were shared again, and the formerly intimate decisions of the Browns were now torn apart by millions. Mary, the long-suffering forgotten wife, was the focus of bitter argument. Some regarded her as a victim. Others blamed her for Kody's conduct. All silence, all weeping, every awkward look on screen was replayed, dissected, transformed into evidence of what she had suffered. And then there was Robyn, the so-called favorite, the one wife who yet appeared to command Kody's loyalty to most of the fans. She became the face of all that had gone awry. They blamed her for destroying the family, for manipulating Kody, for watching as the other wives suffered. Whether deserved or not, her public perception darkened by the day. But no one faced more criticism than Kody himself. Once the dashing patriarch, who sold polygamy as love and religion, he was now labeled controlling, dismissive, even cruel. Every raised voice, every condescending glance, every word of favoritism towards Robyn came back to haunt him. His empire wasn't just cracking from the inside, it was crumbling under the weight of public opinion. And that's where the true peril arose. For when the cameras are off, reality stars are left with something much more delicate than scripted drama. If Christine's account of what happened became true in the minds of the public, Kody stood to lose it all. Not his wives, but the very foundation of the life he had created. But still, the tale wasn't solely about image. Behind the headlines, something much more intimate was playing out. Children in the middle. Lives unraveling. A family no longer united, but under the brightest kind of scrutiny. Judgment unrelenting. And as the heat intensified, one question hung: how far would Kody go to defend what was left of his authority? For all the tabloid headlines, for all the melodrama among the grown-ups, it was the kids who bore the greatest burden. At the moments that never made it onto TV, they witnessed the cracks first. They knew which houses their dads spent the night in, whose voices counted, and whose tears were drowned out. Kids don't need to hear about contracts or demographics to know when love has disappeared. Christine's children most of all lived through years of tension. They overheard the shouting in private, sensed the unease at family gatherings, and learned to read every sigh, every silence, every manufactured smile. When she walked out, it wasn't so much a mother's flight, it was a survival act on their part as well. She was trading chaos for peace, even if it meant leaving behind anything that was known. But if relief came to Christine's kids, others were not so fortunate. Janelle's boys, who were once so close to their dad, became some of his biggest critics. They talked candidly about being pushed aside, about how Kody was gone when they needed him most. The glue that had held their family together was slowly disintegrating, strand by strand, in the most public manner imaginable. And for those boys, anger was an easier emotion to proclaim than heartache. Meanwhile, Mary's only child, Leon, struggled with their own identity and choices, all while navigating a fractured household that offered little stability. For them, the collapse of the family structure was less a shock and more a confirmation of what had always been broken. Their story revealed another truth. Sometimes the most painful fractures happen long before anyone dares to speak them aloud. And then there was the shadow no one could avoid. The tragedy of Garrison's death. Abruptly, the fissures in the family weren't just psychological, they were horribly tangible. Grief does not deceive, and it does not reschedule. Every wife, every child, every parent was compelled to confront what dysfunction had been building all those years, a family that couldn't even grieve together. Mary's mourning poured out in unvarnished emotion. Christine's sorrow was deep but noble. Janelle was a mother laid bare, holding on to her son's memory. And Kody? His reaction was yet another source of contention. Another moment that invited criticism. Another scene that showed this family was incapable of coming together, even during the unimaginable. And still, amidst tragedy, one wife was different. Robyn's absence, her remoteness, her alibis only added fuel to the criticism fire. She said she was working, but the world witnessed something else. Aloofness. To most, it was proof of what they already assumed, that she was never in the family's heart, just in its demise. And if you believe that the pain of the family ceased with mourning, wait until you witness how Kody made even heartbreak another battlefield. To a man who constructed his very being around control, the disintegration of his home wasn't only painful, it was humiliating. Kody had always portrayed himself as the assertive patriarch, the steady hand, the guardian who held chaos at bay. But hiding behind the face he painted for the world was a man desperately trying to cling to crumbling authority. When Christine stepped out, Kody wasn't merely losing a wife, he was losing dominance over the story. Now the woman he had reduced to expendability was rewriting history, converting internal agony into external reality. And Kody knew the price tag. Perception is money in the game of reality television. If Christine emerged the heroine, he would be portrayed as the villain. And villains have shelf life once the camera shuts off. So Kody resisted. He positioned Christine as unfaithful, as unappreciative, as the one who had abandoned the family ideal. He talked of betrayal, of promises broken, of sacrifices for naught. He wanted the public to hear him and view her as the issue, to deflect sympathy away from her. But each statement fell flat. Each justification further entrenched the fissures. Fans weren't believing it. But Kody wasn't ready to give up. He leaned more heavily on the sole card he held. Robyn, she was his shield. His evidence that at least one wife still had faith in him. They both attempted to stand together as unity, devotion, and strength. But to the outside world, it appeared less partnership and more desperation. Two individuals holding on to each other while the empire they had built burned. And yet, in private, even that partnership had its own cracks. Robyn had anticipated inheriting a kingdom, 4 wives, unlimited children, financial stability, and a stage that never faded. Instead, she was attached to a man revealed to be weak, with declining finances and an audience that no longer bought the fairy tale. But here's the catch. Kody wasn't merely attempting to safeguard his marriage, he was attempting to safeguard his empire. The property at Coyote Pass, the royalties from TLC, the future he had envisioned as an independent dynasty. It was all on the line. And the more the wives distanced themselves, the more desperate his efforts to maintain control turned. And if his counterattack seems to have ended with Christine, wait till you see the way he turned on Janelle, the one wife who had ever been his quiet supporter. If Christine's leaving was a bruise to Kody's pride, Janelle's defiance was a knife to his power. For years she had been the rock, the unobtrusive tactician, the wife who balanced the family's books when Kody's get-rich-quick schemes crashed. She was the wife who put up with more than she ought to have, not because she lacked strength, but because she thought security was more important than pride. But even Janelle had limits. When the topic of discussion came to Coyote Pass, the jewel of Kody's vision, it was Janelle who had laid down the cash. who had given up her own security in order to keep the dream afloat. She had believed in the promise of land, of legacy, of a future where her children could inherit something of substance. What she received instead was betrayal. Kody used her investment as his own. He invested time and money into his house with Robyn and let Janelle struggle. He mentioned vision but never executed it. The scales shifted from partnership to use, and Janelle observed it clearly. She wasn't a wife, she was a money man. And when she stood up to him, Kody's mask cracked. The patriarch who had professed to love all of his wives the same was nowhere to be found. Instead, there stood a bitter, defensive, and obstinate man. He accused her of infidelity, of joining forces with Christine, of destroying the family vision. But under the accusations lurked fear, the fear that Janelle, like Christine, was no longer afraid to leave. And if you thought this was all about cash, think again. The greater hurt was from their kids. Janelle's boys, particularly Garrison and Gabriel, had had enough. They were mad at their dad's favoritism, his absence, his infatuation with Robyn. They no longer cared about obeying the patriarchal hierarchy. They cared about the truth. And when they testified against him, so did Janelle. For Kody, that was the ultimate betrayal. A wife who preferred her children above him. The fights became more bitter. The silences more oppressive. Janelle's quiet submission had become quiet resistance. And for the first time, Kody understood that the woman once who provided his anchor was willing to sever the rope altogether. And here's the scary part. Janelle didn't require Kody. Smart with money, emotionally tough, and with kids who loved her, she possessed the assets to forge a life of her own independent of his dominance. Which meant for Kody, not only was losing Janelle losing another wife, it was losing the pillar that he'd assumed. And if you think Christine's getaway was dramatic, just wait until you hear about how Janelle's peaceful rebellion almost took down the very empire Kody and Robyn were attempting to maintain. For years, Robyn had gotten to wear the favoritism crown. She was the favored wife who got the lion's share of Kody's time, attention, and protection. Outside, she was the dutiful wife, the one who just wanted the family to get along. Behind the gentle voice and the weepy eyes, however, was a woman who had quietly profited from every crack, every exodus, every unspoken injury caused to the other wives. Christine's departure hurt Kody, but Robyn saw it as a blessing. One less competitor, one less contestant arguing for her to be at the center of Kody's universe. And when Mary wandered off, it only seemed to cement her position even more. She felt victorious, for an instant, that she had won Kody's love, but also the game. Winning alone isn't a victory, though. Robyn watched the empire she had battled to rule, burning to ashes in her hands. The large family gatherings, once lively but disorganized, were now vacant chairs and tense silence. The children who had played together in a mesh of half-sibling relationships stood separated by anger. And the financial basis that had enabled her dream home? It was shattering, brick by brick, and worse still, the wives she believed she had survived were gaining strength outside of marriage. Christine was flourishing, independent and empowered. Janelle was gaining independence, unfazed in her subtle rebellion. Even Mary, once so desperate to hold on to Kody, was discovering her own peculiar sense of peace. And with each step they took ahead, Robyn increasingly resembled the woman left standing, holding the remnants. Within the mansion, the mood changed. What had been her sanctuary now felt like a cage. Kody's bitterness, his constant venting about betrayal, his refusal to relinquish control, it all permeated her life. She had pictured life with him as a partnership, but the reality was more sinister. She wasn't merely the beloved wife anymore. She was the surviving wife. And within the silence, everything altered, because being the final wife hadn't won her anything. It had won her the backlash of Kody's anger, his shortcomings, and his inability to let go. Robyn's tears, once used to garner sympathy, were now helpless. No one was paying attention anymore. The family she believed she had won over was lost, and she was left with the man who had pushed everyone else out. And the irony is this, the same favoritism that granted Robyn authority was what trapped her. For in taking her, Kody had lost them all. And without the wives, without the children, without the facade of unity, Robyn was no longer a mother to a family. She was the monarch of a kingdom in shambles. But if you believe this was her moment of collapse, wait until you listen to how the financial squall that erupted afterwards broke the illusion of authority. Robyn struggled so vehemently to maintain. Money had long been the unspoken glue holding the Brown family together. The sister wives' existence appeared picture perfect on TV for years. Big houses, new businesses, and the potential of Coyote Pass. Behind the smiling confessions and family dinners, though, was a reality nobody wanted to accept. This is an empire of sand. Christine had gone without taking her portion. Mary had withdrawn her money quietly. Janelle had invested almost all she had into the land that never existed. And Robyn? She had the mansion, the largest, most costly token of Kody's preference. But with each exit, the TLC checks seemed smaller. The show wasn't the booming spectacle it had been. And reality TV viewers had a short attention span. Costs went through the roof. But the revenues? They failed. The plural prosperity dream started to disintegrate under the pile of loans, mortgages, and empty promises. Kody, the great self-assured patriarch with grand dreams, now resembled a desperate man struggling to manage debts beyond his control. The Coyote Pass land lay barren. Its arid acres a ghostly reminder of what was planned but never achieved. He had bragged of constructing a compound, a family kingdom, but what existed was a symbol of failure, dollars spent, nothing to show for it. And for the wives who'd walked out, the truth was crushing. Christine had lost years of financial stability for a marriage that had concluded in betrayal. Janelle had funded fantasies that now seemed like fantasies. Even Mary, who'd invested everything to be counted, stood by and watched as her efforts disappeared into Kody's nothing empire. In the meantime, Robyn, whose palace had once resembled a trophy, saw it rapidly becoming a burden. The maintenance, the payments, the strain of being the final wife bound to Kody's failing power. Security was now turned into shackles. But the worst of it? It wasn't just money. It was trust. Each unpaid bill, each broken promise, each failed business venture wasn't just a money wound. It was evidence that Kody's leadership had failed. The patriarch who had insisted on obedience had guided his family directly into destruction. And when the reality of those debts, those failed investments, and those broken dreams started surfacing, the wives realized something terrifying. Escape wasn't only about love, it was about staying alive, because remaining meant being pulled down with him. And if you believe monetary destruction was the conclusion to this tale, wait until you understand how the legal battles, real estate wars, and stunning courtroom hearings ripped open revelations that nobody anticipated would ever see the light of day. It was not long before the Brown family drama spilled from the walls of their residences into the harsh, unforgiving glare of legal battles. What had been personal arguments over loyalty, money, and betrayal were now sworn testimonies, written documents, and in a few instances, explosive confrontations on the stand. The wives who had previously had their hurt locked away were now testifying, clear, unflinching, and raw. Christine's voice quaked not with fear, but with conviction, as she spoke of the years she had relinquished autonomy to sustain a marriage that degraded her of dignity. She told of being marginalized, of seeing her children disregarded, of living the solitude that accompanied being less than within her own household. Her words weren't affidavit, they were emancipation. And then Janelle. For so long, she had spoken little, measuring out her words, strategic. But in the court documents, her composed voice had a sharp edge. She laid out the figures, the sacrifices financially, the payments on land that had been made in faith. She sketched out the portrait of a man who took, and promised kingdoms that were never delivered, leaving his wives to bear the burden of dreams that benefited only him. And then there was Mary. For years she had said nothing, a shadow on the fringes of family history. But in court, her silence was shattered. She testified, not just of betrayal, but of humiliation. How her value was stripped from her under lights. How her loyalty was used against her. How her suffering was unseen until it could no longer be contained. Her words stung the most, because they were dripping with years of silent pain. All the while, Kody sat, his arms crossed over his chest, his face revealing moments of fury and incredulity. He had constructed his personality on control, on being the perfect patriarch image. But here, stripped of his scenery and his armor, he was no longer the assertive leader. He was a man caught in the act. And maybe for the first time, he couldn't talk his way out. Robyn also had her questions. For so long, she had been the peacemaker. But the depositions pointed a finger at her power, her status as the favorite wife, and how her victory was the cost of everyone else. In that room, her tears no longer generated sympathy. They generated suspicion. Then there was the moment that held everyone in stunned silence. One question waited in the air. Where had all the money gone? The wives had invested, sacrificed, believed, and yet, all that remained to see was vacant land, a staggering debt, and one mansion, a reminder of disparity. It was not only a courtroom fight. It was the unveiling of an empire. The reality was no longer concealed in reality, TV cuts and family sit-downs. It was in black and white, spoken out loud for the entire world to hear. And if you believe those confessions put an end to things, wait until you hear what else arrived in the wake. Because when the dust finally settled, the Brown family had a future that no one could have predicted. And a question that continues to haunt: how much of all that we witnessed was ever real in the first place? When the depositions were over, and the documents had been submitted, there was no grand outcome. No blanket reconciliation that resolved the story into a tidy package. There was, instead, silence, the kind that's heavy, like the eye of a storm. Christine walked into her new existence with a feeling of liberty, her laughter ringing louder than it had for years. Janelle worked towards independence, her children in support of her with loyalty and strength. Mary, wounded but not defeated, was able to stand on her own, her voice no longer muted by honor to a man who never recognized her value. And Robyn, despite all her years of positioning, of sitting atop the throne of favoritism, she ended up in the isolation of it all. The mansion, once her sanctuary, rang with emptiness. Being the remaining wife did not feel like triumph. It felt like banishment. And as for Kody, the king who once presided over a vast plural empire, he was confronted with a reality that he could not dictate. No wives to submit, no single family to show, no compound of dreams to hold up as his legacy. Only shreds, disconnected relationships, tense children, and the sour burden of realizing he had constructed his kingdom on shattered promises. But here is the terrifying reality. The Brown family's tale does not finish here, because families like these don't vanish. The marks are there. The kids remember, and the world, which was enamored with their perfect portrait of plural love, now observes the devastation with questions that might never be solved. Was it ever actually about love? Or was it always about control? Did the wives get away in time? Or will the darkness of this family haunt them for eternity? And perhaps the most chilling question of all: what happens when the cameras are turned off, and all that remains is silence? The answers never will be clear. But one thing is sure, the Browns' tale is no longer one of oneness. It's a tale of survival. And in the end, survival could be the sole leftover legacy. So now, I'll leave it in your hands. After all of it, the betrayals, the cash, the confessions in the courtroom, the silence. What do you think? Was this a family that was destroyed by love or greed? And do you think they'll ever really be free from the shadow of what they created?